All right. Yeah. So we are doing today Caliban the Witch, Accumulation of Labor and the Degradation of Women. Was that in it? No, that's not the name of the chapter.
That is,
What is it?
isn't it the accumulation of labor and the degradation of women, constructing difference, and the transition to capitalism?
Oh, okay. So I propose we do uh half of this chapter because I've noticed it was really long. I mean, we can do whatever, but and also the theme changes around population decline, economic crisis, and discipline. And I think it would be good to, if you guys agree, we split this.
Works for me.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. And this is I just this chapter is like thick because we were kind of pulling some generalized kind of conjectures about history and capitalism and these different epochs, but now she's kind of going headfirst into them, right? So we got a lot of nitty-gritty stuff.
Right. How would you feel about cutting it on page 81, where it starts with the state intervention in reproduction of labor? I think, or 82 is where that is.
Well, why don't we think in terms of, because on mine 63, where she lays out the kind of the argument step by step.
Introduction? Yeah, okay.
How about we just cover like the first 2 points on that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you guys hit me.
Yeah, right where she starts talking about witch hunts.
Oh, okay. Well, so if you're there, let me say this. So what we're gonna do, where we're going to be, again, like last time, we want to kind of touch all these time periods, but we're really stuck between the 17th century for today and 16th century, right? A lot of like 1520s past, right? So this is a transitional period in kind of Marxist histories. She's picking a very long one because she started in kind of like almost like 13th or the 14th century, blah, 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 blah. But I guess I want to say that because she's very interested in this. Why? Because she says that not only Daddy Marx, but almost everybody neglects the transitional period. Why? Because first they say that it's one-dimensional. It's just accumulating towards capitalism. She says that's wrong. There's actually these relapses and these, we're talking about Habermas. There are these windows in history that open many times to change the course of history, to be otherwise, to be in different worlds. I mean, which is kind of, I think, is a profound thing to say, and we should talk about it because it touches Marxism. Yeah. So kind of that's where we are. Yeah, in that transition, and we're trying to re-explain it. Yeah,
I think there's also a tendency to periodize history in line with like the Owl of Minerva problem of only looking back and ignoring transitional periods because they're boring and one-dimensional from the perspective of where we are now. But the branching possibilities are irrelevant because they died or something like that. Just like we have the examples of like all the gold and silver from the Americas that come into the colonial overlords, that without that like infusion, this colonialism would have been yet another failed branch, right? So we find it interesting because it sort of had enduring power. And that's a really unproductive way to think about history because it locks us into the various capitalist realisms and sort of colonialist and imperialist realisms of seeing where we are as inevitable.
We got to read a time travel story and do it on the podcast one of these days, because
I was thinking about that when he was saying that. What I was kind of also thinking about, we're seeing a bit of like the influence of psychoanalysis on history, because suddenly you're saying that, like, the enduring trend or the presence is not really the explanatory. What you want to look for is the buried fragments that keep kind of try to prevail. Like they come up, they try to kind of express themselves, and then you got to push them back or they go back. But yeah, you're very right, because the whole I'm getting this sense that Federici, like, above all, wants to dispel with determinism of historical epochs, that it's like that these units that pop up and then they become cause and effects. No.
Yeah, she uses evolved again, because we talked about that last time on page 62, in quotes again, because
Yeah.
and that's a you and Mark are saying that, like, this kind of determinism that capitalism was kind of inevitable, and it kind of also like paves over like all the anti-feudal struggle that she described in the chapter, which is like, new history for, not something that's normally taught in most history classes,
Or it's
or even in
taught in fragments, right? Like you read about Munster, a book
the
on its
Jacob
own.
Rebellion and certain things.
Yeah, so you don't get the class struggle picture. So there is so she's expressing fidelity, but also like, hey, let me explain what y'all missed, right? I mean, like, it's a Marxist history, but it's developed.
I also think there's just like in line with the determinism is the narrative arc of history problems that prop up, where we think it's determined but also teleologically inevitable. Like I think about Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, talking about how if it wasn't white Europe enslaving the world, it would have been the caliphates or something like that. It would have been someone else. It was just a notion of who got to power first and who maintained it. And there's some power in that kind of a framework, but it misses the fact that there was plenty of opportunity for that, and that didn't become the structure. And there's something to be learned from that. It doesn't mean that like white people have poisoned souls or something like that, but it does mean that we have to like stop being like, well, it was us or them, right? And in the case of viewing capitalism as a deterministic route out of feudalism, we end up assigning it a place in the arc of history of like capitalism, will have its death, but it will have served to elevate the masses out of, an even worse misery or something like that. And I don't buy it. I don't think Federici does either.
Yeah, and you're right, because it's a criticism of both certain interpretations of Marx and also liberal, well, just liberal, conservative, everyone, mainstream politics, who defends colonialism and imperialism and ravages of capitalism.
Right. Yeah. And also like the other left. I mean, what Marx said about Du Bois, like when he's making that point, right? It's like, look, race is not responsible for this thing. It's not like a determinative element in a teleological history, right? It's, I mean, I don't love Ta-Nehisi Coates, but race is a child of racism, but yes, but he's also, or I have a problem with saying that it would have been, although the reasons for it are arbitrary, right? And like, it's not whites suppressing blacks or something, that some other form of oppression would have taken its place. And then, I guess I'm in that sense, then I would move more to Federici that, hey man, I want to see all the other possibilities that didn't make it, right?
Yeah, because the other I mean, well, there's other alternatives, I'm sure, but I mean, I can't really just accept the iron laws of history route that someone needed to be in that position to be the colonizer.
Yeah, what's the point in that? If
Well,
that's the
that's the
Yeah.
case.
biggest thing, is that
Well,
it's
it's
just
just
not
that
a
they're
useful
not
like
working.
framework to think through the problem with, because we end up being like, okay, what do we do from there? Like at best, the best thing you could ever come to from that is to be like, oh, we finally realized it was inappropriate, and now let's set about undoing it and replacing it with a mildly milder form of horror.
Or you
Right.
say, well, hopefully they take us somewhere nicer, these laws, because do we really have, if we didn't have a choice then,
Sure.
do we have a choice going forward? And, you might try to be like, well, communism is that break from history and where we get to finally choose. But
Mhm.
okay, well, we won't know what to do then because we've been just been riding along.
Yeah, we've been doing this the whole
In the Habermasian problem of the like,
yeah.
yeah.
Cool. All right. So there is a little, okay, let me read this. Oh shit, I should have used your version. I'm sorry, but I'll direct this time. So I'm like from where it says fourth in this chapter when it says introduction, I'm like 4 or 5 paragraphs down. And I want to, and this is the conclusion. No, it's not the conclusion paragraphs, but it starts with "As we know, conquest, enslavement," and she says here, "As we know, conquest, enslavement, robbery, murder, in brief force, were the pillars of this process." Also, I noticed my book has a lot of misspellings and grammatical, like the punctuations are in the wrong place because it automatically was transcribed. So apologies. And this is what I wanted to emphasize here. Thus, the concept of a transition to capitalism is in many ways a fiction. British historians in the 1940s and 1950s used it to define a period roughly from 1450 to 1650 in which feudalism in Europe was breaking down while no new social economic system was yet in place, though elements of a capitalist society were taking shape. And then she goes in the bottom, because she talks a little bit about that. She goes, transition then cannot evoke the changes that paved the way to the advent of capitalism and the forces shape them. Weird that the forces that shape them probably. In this volume, therefore, I use the term primarily in a temporal sense while I refer to the social processes that characterize the feudal reaction and the development of capitalist relations within the Marxist concept of primitive accumulation, though I agree with its critics that we must rethink Marxist interpretation. And before we go to that, since we promised we were going to explain all the jargon, I missed that middle part. We get to it. We'll probably repeat it many times. No worries. But yeah, so here we are going to take that dominant views of this transitional period, and we're going to look it through the eyes of primitive accumulation, and then we're going to elaborate on primitive accumulation and get rid of what we're talking about, that teleological stance. And just the last thing I'm going to read is, I think we kind of have to read this whole paragraph here because we want to explain primitive accumulation. So Marx introduced the concept of primitive accumulation at the end of Capital Volume 1 to describe the social and economic restructuring that the European ruling class initiated in response to its accumulation crises, and to establish, in polemics with Adam Smith, that one, capitalism could not have developed without a prior concentration of capital and labor, and that two, the divorcing of the workers from the means of production, not abstinence of the rich, is a source of capital wealth. Primitive accumulation then is a useful concept, for it connects the feudal reaction, we'll get to that, with the development of a capitalist economy, and it identifies the historical and logical conditions for the development of the capitalist system. primitive, in quotes, originary, indicating a precondition for the existence of capitalist relations as much as a specific event in time. Right. So there was all. Yeah, I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and what she's doing is, because from before we talked about, she's arguing that primitive accumulation is an ongoing process that is used, still to this day to kind of
Oh yeah.
jumpstart a capitalist economy in somewhere. Unlike Marx, who took it as originary, as happening at one time. And so she's saying that, and she's saying this transitional period is actually very productive because it's producing these methods and experimenting with methods of primitive accumulation, rather than just being a kind of waypoint from feudalism to capitalism.
Yeah. It's also yeah, in line with the notion of experimenting with methods of primitive accumulation. This is like the emergence of the various names and actions that will later become associated with like genocide, where genocide is a very productive means of primitive accumulation to like simultaneously dispossess and labor a population. There's sort of like a notion of like genocide poetics that can be read through this history that's productive, and really like foundational for the logics of genocide.
Yeah, most definitely. Violence is the theme of this book, and you're talking about like violence in its most kind of crude sense, as you're describing it in the form of like genocide, as a systematic kind of elimination of like certain categories of people. Yeah, and she's, and also like primitive accumulation in this part is also in Marx, as she's saying, and this is true. It's development on Ricardo, but also like a polemic against Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And these 2 points are, I think, important because Adam Smith, the concentration of capital and labor and wealth in Adam Smith, they're just there. There are people, there are the markets that develop into industries, if you will, with this kind of a harmonious relationship with the countryside. It's a fascinating kind of science fiction, but also, to be kind of charitable in the way that Hobbes or John Locke or all these people are writing. But also the second point is that, look, the source of wealth, like how wealth accumulates in that moment of capitalism, it's not the capitalist being like, oh fuck, we gotta save and be frugal, and see return like this, as again it works in sort of kind of the ethical capitalist gentleman in Wealth of Nations. It's like, no, you say that, hey, you people that are, as much like the capitalists are in this productive process, you people are cut off from this process. You're merely there, you're visiting, you'll be back tomorrow, you're here for a couple hours, and then the other person's siphoning off and using and utilizing and exercising total control over that process. So that is kind of the function of primitive accumulation for Marx, as a kind of a polemic, and then as a historical period too. But she's, from her perspective, not adequate in the historical sense. Logical sense, yeah, but yeah.
Sure. There's definitely a place in which I think Marx and Smith maybe having a unproductive argument, where where it's like a methodological argument. I think Smith, in line with Rousseau, is just imagining a sort of, taking a current trend into the future and then making the double mistake of taking the future of that trend into the past. And then you're like, oh, well, I can see how this is working now. So that just means probably at some point in the past, someone got lucky with one extra sheep. And because their herd was one extra sheep bigger, they were able to sell it for just marginal gains, capitalized on marginal gains over centuries and centuries. And now we have a baron, or whatever sort of garbage that person's thinking. And ultimately, I think for Marx and Smith, it doesn't much matter why, because I do think they're both agreeing that capital has to be accumulated before the start of the book, right? Before the start of the inquiry into how capitalism accumulates. Capitalism has already accumulated, and and like needing to focus more on like, what does that say fundamentally about what capitalism is? I think that's the part that Federici is trying to bring in, is the how and by what means did the capitalists accumulate their capital, is where there's like deep connective tissue with the nobility of manorialism.
Right. And again, yeah, I mean, you're very right in that the kind of the discussion that is kind of not happening, but also, yes, I mean, capital, even in capital starts with commodities, right? The first 7 pages of commodity, like that's the starting point. Primitive accumulation is actually in the end, right? This like, hey, actually where we started, it is over here. But I also really like that idea because I see it in movies a lot. When you were saying that the like how the things are working in the future are cast in the past, and then the past is kind of put in the future. You're like watching a movie that is like transpiring in the, I don't know, 7th century or something, and people say shit like, I gotta go to work, or
Yeah,
like
I thought of that too. I don't know what I
their
was watching.
gender norms, yeah.
Yeah, all the jokes
That
are
kind
like,
of
what if
stuff.
like capitalism like was back at this time?
Mhm.
Right, and then you watch Jetsons, and the credit to David Graeber, and the future looks exactly like what you're doing right now, with people going to work and being stuck in traffic in
Right.
spaceships,
Well, you work
like
like 7 minutes a week or something. They still
Yeah.
thought that the work week would continually shrink.
you
Right.
still got a boss.
Yeah.
You push that button, yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So
Robot made.
yeah, and then there was so this is kind of the temporal thing we're doing. Those 4 points, do we need to read those or just get to them where we get to them? They're enumerated.
I mean, I really liked the points. I thought
Yeah. You
I was
want
just
to?
this is great.
I don't want to pass by the
Please.
best Marx quote, I think, in the book is
Yes.
Marx also recognized that a great deal of capital, which today appears in the United States without any certificate of birth, was yesterday in England the capitalized blood of children. It's like excellent.
Yeah, I remember there was this Jacobin article a couple of years ago. No, actually, it was more than a couple of years ago. But yeah, they just did it like a collection of kind of Gothic references in, but Gothic, I mean, kind of this imagery of fantastical, but also this imagery of extreme violence, but in a surreal way, like blood-soaked children and stuff like that. A lot of it there, yeah. A master, like he editorializes, but he always like, it's also like he doesn't get carried away with his own words, like
Yeah. I mean, this sort of this what am I trying to say? Concision of the quote is a great deal of its power. It's like
Yeah.
a very, very fine way to drive home the point about filing the serial numbers off.
That's it, right? I mean, that's like this idea that like, yeah, because Marx, like after his exile, he's going to Britain, and like Capital is basically a depiction of British capitalism, and he's looking at this. There is this advent of a new age, blah blah blah. We even start using those words, but he's like, look, this is still a legacy of a overwhelmingly European history, right? And not a harmonious one or natural development of it. Yeah, I don't know. James, you want to do the
Sure.
you
Yeah, I
want?
think it
Should we
just
read
lays
them or
out.
talk about them each or?
Yeah, I'll read them and then we can decide if we want to talk about them.
Sure.
Yeah, because I think it just lays out like her progression, her argument. One, the expropriation of European workers from their means of subsistence and the enslavement of Native Americans and Africans to the mines and plantations of the New World were not the only means by which a world proletariat was formed and accumulated. Okay, so she's just saying there's other means.
Yeah, and there is today, even today, by very kind of smart, educated people. I mean, you see this overemphasis on two groups, right? And it's and the content of that discussion is usually racialized, even though we're also talking about polities, right? We're talking about civilizations in part in the continent of Africa, but we're talking about polities who are dealing with the British and then the French and the United States and the Spanish over here. Um, Anyways, yeah, then no, I think this is definitely a good thesis here,
And for Federici, the glaring thing is going to be women, the appropriation of women's labor.
which is missing from that story, of course. Yeah.
Point two, this process required the transformation of the body into a work machine.
Well, I do want to add one more thing to the first point, which is it's certainly in there, but I think she's got like this 3-pillar system. It seems like roughly that it's like the witch hunts, the transatlantic slave trade, and colonialism as distinct from the transatlantic slave trade, like the domination of the land, the enslavement of peoples, and it's like predicated categories of race and all these kinds of things that are invented to make this possible, and the hunting, anti-solidarity, and burning of women as witches to police them into femininity, right? So I just don't want to leave out the land. I think that's something that is why one of the things that like witchcraft has some sort of theoretical liberatory potential is because it is situated in space, and so is like it was important to take West Africans away from West Africa in order to cut off their access to any form of support whatsoever or any chance of real escape, you know.
Yeah, in fact, the trade for the, I mean, it's transpiring through trade for the most part.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and I hear you because at the end of the day, we don't want to say Marx forgot women, but she wants to say that this transitional period, like you're saying, it creates these genders and defines their functions, and those functions are what is the good word for it? They're imperative, like they're crucial for this accumulation of wealth, at least for this. I'm sure she adds on to it maybe down the line. And we need to kind of, yeah, keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that they all inform each other, right? That there's like a lot of learning that happens in between methods of policing different groups, like into subservience.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of I think good thing we've lived long enough to. I mean, people have picked up her mantle. I guess that's important. I mean, are you referring to the point that that even within those instances there is that gender dynamic that is working? Because I mean,
Well, I mean, part of what she talks about is that the exporting of the witch hunts to the Americas was a vital portion of maintaining the plantation structure. That, you know, and for example, like the vast majority of the West African peoples that are stolen as slaves are brought to a place that used to have people, where most of those people are dead now, and you know, through a combination of what's probably historical accident and then compounded by grave you know, terror and mass murder, that these things like heavily inform each other, and that in isolation, like, why is this relevant? This is relevant because one of the things we struggle with about capitalism is that it's so robust and self-supporting, but it's self-supporting by having this like Hegelian architectonic of 1,000 different ways to oppress and extract, where each one of them depends on each other, so that taking out any individual leg is irrelevant.
Yes, yeah, no, okay, yeah, no, that is a lot more clear. And then there's the kind of the process of excavating those relations, and focusing between the relations between them, rather than always, I mean, you have to consider capitalism in the background or the transitional period, but uh you're for example, I mean, I guess the most crude example I can think of is the did you have a good example of that? Because I mean, I'm thinking about like maybe 20th century struggle of, for example, the tension between the women's suffrage and the black suffrage, let's say, or kind of delivering on the second founding in the Reconstruction era.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, some way to put this in the feminist theory framework would be to say that the need for intersectionality is created by capitalism itself. That we can't understand these things in isolation, because the only things that capitalism does well, the source of its entire strength, is that it is a coherent ideology of flow that understands from a need for flow of material, labor, cash, whatever. It understands that it is not necessary to try and overwhelm the opposition with like having a big enough royal guard or something like that. That's just not, like, biopolitics is a wildly natural extension of capitalism. And I don't want to make the same mistake I was critiquing earlier of saying like that it must have come out, but it seems very likely that we will end up in this world from the starting place of capitalism, that we would end up in a world in which you get people to police themselves by, what's oversimplistically called divide and conquer, but is far more like weaponizing weakness, as in like weaponizing the idea that masculinity or whiteness or Germanness or whatever the hell, that it's each individual thing is not sufficient and sufficient to control the world on its own, right? It's this like perversion of the coalition, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. And then there's also the Foucauldian discipline factor. But I mean, that discipline is actually, I think it's where you're talking about. But yeah, it's really above that crudity of like divide and conquer, because I think it's overused. Like I can see, like if you're analyzing like colonial British India, and you have like some sort of sect that is looking over the Sikhs, and that, yeah, but here it's kind of like, again, let me use like American politics, like the Republicans have been overtly successful in revitalizing a anglicized form of like Catholicism within middle class Hispanic residents and Hispanic, I'm sorry, I'm using it for the lack of better word, to clump certain categories. And then utilize that to say that, okay, so now these aspects of you are against, for example, the LGBT question. And I'm talking about in civic. I understand I'm far from labor, but I think it does lead to that. And yeah, the tiny conditions that capitalism makes, and then once that happens, once you have like a biracial woman, helping you with your like your woke CIA fucking commercial, or you have like a Peruvian Republican candidate in West Texas that runs on like, pray the gay away.
Right.
You need less police power to have that systems of operation kind of develop. Yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah. All right, part two.
Hey, part two.
James waiting patiently.
No, you just guys were just spitting fire, so I'll let you go. Point two. This process required the transformation of the body into a work machine, and the subjugation of women to the reproduction of the workforce. Most of all, it required the destruction of the power of women, which in Europe as in America was achieved through the extermination of the witches, quote unquote witches.
Yeah. I think Mark already mentioned everything with that, and we'll break this one down because there's a good section coming up on it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like she's been kind of talking about the witch hunt a lot, and in this chapter, she finally starts describing it more and talking about it more and its role in this whole process.
I think it's enough, I think, to add on this one that it was historically relevant that women were attacked through witchcraft, not just for being a woman or something like that. Like it creates misogyny to be liberated as a weapon for later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm looking into the Tlingit, and of course, this is these there weren't one people in kind of southeast Alaska, yeah, but so we use shorthand Tlingit as kind of modern reference, but yeah, there's I accidentally run into this that's as United States purchases Alaska and as they show up for land, of course there is a total devastation within these native communities, but then there's these events startup of the killing of witches within the native communities. But you're right, like gender is not really central to this. The centrality of it is the division of labor, like and also the breakdown of societies. We have to always remember that by the time we even start dealing with the natives as a form of like a colonies, right? We've like about 80% of these people are immediately dying, like across the world, because they're not separate. These people are trading with each other, they're conversing with each other, they're seeing each other, they have social events. Like America is already a cosmopolitan world. And these diseases, like the numbers are incredible. You're talking about 70-80% of the total population. So by the time you see these interactions that we talk about in American history, like those desperate bands of people left, they just experienced what the Europeans had experienced during the plague, except they experienced it in a matter of and like imagine. I went to the west of Alaska, where you can show your dick to Russians, basically. And like that's how close you are.
Sarah Palin's house.
She is actually in the South and she cannot see Russia. I will testify to that. That bitch could not even see Alaska. There's so many trees down there. But you go to some of these villages, and the villages, there's like some of them 7 houses, and then there's the center, like tiny left, and then there's the placards. They show like, oh, there were so many thousands of us, and we know because they were recorded, like there was some contact and observation. And then like 1917, the epidemic happens 1916, 1917, and like immediately in the matter of weeks, you're talking about villages that disappear and villages that fall below 10. Everybody's dead, and these people have stories of like children's walking in tundras, like just corpses. Anyways, I'm sorry, this is long-winded, but it's important to realize, like, people come in like what happens when these contacts they displays, and what kind of effects they have on the social structures. Yeah.
Yeah, it made me think of that. I think it's 1491. It's not necessarily leftist, but it's good. And I think there's a documentary that might have come out.
Yeah,
Describes
the year China invented America or something like that.
No, it's like describing like the pre-Columbian America, really, before. And then he has one called 1493, like after the conquest.
I have not read that. Oh, I have to check that out. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I didn't finish it, so maybe we could read it. Point 3.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Primitive accumulation then was not simply an accumulation and concentration of exploitable workers and capital. It was also an accumulation of differences and divisions within the working class, whereby hierarchies built upon gender as well as quote unquote race and age became constitutive of class rule and the formation of the modern proletariat.
I mean, that's what Mark has been saying, right? I mean, this premise 3 is kind of
a combination of the
yeah.
So
and I keep wanting to like whip out, because I like charted it. I was not charted it. I mean, it's not that fucking complex, but
Kantian now.
I know. And also like change the names. The synthetic apyri gender, which we all know is a squirrel.
Is man.
Uh, no, sorry. Yeah, let's get okay. Maybe we should say. Yeah. So okay, again, we're coming into the community. I fucking hate that word, but here it is. A concentration of people who have some sort of kinship, like they're being engulfed by these processes of transition, right? There's no capitalism yet, but people are doing things, there's struggles going on. There are class struggles. Um, so you have to look at this, and I'll say this briefly, you guys can and develop it later, but that struggle is seeping into the family structure, right? Because production, maybe this is where we say it, like in Marx's idea, you have to think about the worker as part of the production. Like humanity is not a special thing. I mean, humanity is very special to people like Marx, but it doesn't come to this process as this external thing. The human being himself is part of the process, as that it has to reproduce itself. And this is like very basic shit. Like you don't need philosophy. You, after you work, you have to go home, you have to eat, you have to take a shit, you have to maybe do something that's pleasurable. You have to do these things to get yourself ready for tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Work. Do it over again. So you do this, and then the capitalist has to find a way. He has to sustain you, because there's a finite amount of bags of meat running around in the world. And as you've noticed in the past 2 years, we're very easy to kill. Anyway, so he also has to be cognizant that he needs, stupid Sean to have enough so he'll show up tomorrow. So that's production, and that's reproduction in Marx's sense. But Federici is like, there's also reproduction that happen at home. Where do these human beings come from? Excuse me. The human, yeah, they
That's like a simple afterthought. That's like a really kind of complex process.
I know, like,
and men tend to forget that, I think, especially historically, men in philosophy. Yeah,
I've sucked, but it's not Lemmings where these things just enter into history from the side of the screen, or there is a finite amount of them already existent. We mistake, God forbid, like axioms of science, that there's finite amount of fucking matter or whatever. So there's there's a huge part of a production that needs to happen at home, and that's Marx is right. Marx does talk about women and families and children and capital and stuff, but he doesn't do that kind of analysis over there as much as she wants to do here. So every time you see production and you kind of do the parentheses and put a re in there just to be cute because like you have a master's or something, like think about it like that. Think about it as one word, think about them as recurring, think about them in factory, think about them at home. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the numbers aren't the whole story, but I think they're helpful in this kind of a framework. 2012 WHO analysis that says that at the State of the World in 2012, 60% of, they have a kind of silly way of naming it, but 60% of the world's labor is care labor, by which they mean like having children, raising children, taking care of old people, painting the house, cleaning the house, cooking food, and
is medical, does nursing and stuff fall in there or not?
Depends on whether it was professionalized. If it's professionalized and paid, then no. If it's unpaid, their distinction was specifically about unpaid care labor, which is to say that capitalism is a system by which 60% of the labor is unpaid, right? That's like the founding thing that we should say from that statistic,
Yeah, obviously the most efficient system ever devised.
Right.
And I wonder where that number is now, and this is, again, we'll get to this, but maybe you should kind of lay it out. It's important for the reader to be like, you have to always, like with Marx, with after Hegelian, you always act, okay, so someone just gave me some material description. All right. What sort of ideas flow out of that? Like what sort of ideologies pass from that? Okay, at home you have suddenly a different kind of gender norms, right? The different kind of hierarchies, or maybe they are they're more expressed, or maybe they're dulled down. But anyway, so when you're at home, your reproduction is 100% not immersed, right? It's you're doing, I guess the woman is doing, and the man we've already accepted, if we accepted the thesis of capital, that he's getting exploited. That's how surplus capital is being made, by paying you less and less. Yeah, and then in that economic subservience creates that illusion of a natural order, or that the gentleman is more powerful, and there are still people distilled with that. I'm sorry that to have to go through this really bullshit, like and not interesting, but you see people that
I would
still
say there's even
think that women are physical. Sorry.
I would say there's even a resurgence of it with like kind of Peterson enforced monogamy
Yeah.
kind of ideas, and like trad wives.
Yeah. Man brain good, man muscles bigger, therefore man smarter, man stronger. I don't know.
But I wanted to say on top of what Mark said, like
Yeah.
with the statistics there, I was just thinking about that combined with like the kind of effect capitalism is having on mental health, requiring more care, usually unpaid because people can't afford it.
Right.
So yeah, it's just this kind of narrowing in.
Yeah, guess what? Because this, like, the ultimately irreducible social being is now like in like fucking four walls, and
Yeah,
like
because I was going to say too, the reproduction that Marx talked about doesn't include like kind of psychic or mental health, or any of your kind of your welfare of your mind, because you're literally becoming a part of the machine, at least on this kind of factory-based analysis. That all you're needed for is to, like, the smaller your little child arm can get into that machine and turn the crank or whatever, better. Unless you think about pushing the button 20,000 times a day.
You take the hand off and replace it with a wrench right away. It's like maximally efficient.
Yeah, the baby just like exudes grease. It doesn't even need to like carry.
Yeah, I think this is just to be clear, like not a critique of Marx at all, because I think it would be absurd for Marx to have been able to like have a viewpoint on biopolitics yet, since biopolitics really requires this Marxist input to like develop itself as a theoretical framework. But that self-reproduction, the version where you have to go home and entertain yourself so that you don't shoot yourself before you get to work tomorrow, that itself has become a form of unpaid labor. That's not, even that is not really done for yourself, right? And like that functionally is the basic premise of biopolitics, of the like, how many different ways can we get you to become a productive unit, where we pay you for almost none of it. We take as much as we can as a quotient of how long you'll survive under it. You know? Right? Like 8-hour workday is a capitalist innovation because you keep the workers alive longer. Instead of viewing it purely, it's obviously both, but instead of viewing it purely as some sort of a union labor victory project, it's also victory by the capitalists. And an immediate, like, the sort of connective tissue of history to go from there to suddenly capitalists are interested in hiring Black men in America, for example, in the American version of that labor struggle. And like that is just I guess maybe I'm running a little bit out of thread on that one, but there's like everything becomes productive and reproductive labor simultaneously.
Yeah, and these
Right.
shifts made me think of something she talks about later on that we'll get to, about how at one point the plantation owners just kind of worked the enslaved people and didn't really there weren't no there were little sexual division, and the women worked the field and they kind of just worked even while they're pregnant. They didn't really bother with controlling the reproduction until the slave trade was cut off and they needed to shift to
Right.
kind of this intense control over the women's bodies and creating these kind of gender norms among
Right.
the slaves.
Which far from being some sort of pure victory, became the genesis moment for the interstate slave trade, the second middle passage or whatever, whereby you start engaging in these like Pokemon breeding programs.
Yeah, and it reminded me like it is analogous, I think, in a way to kind of what earlier we saw in the book about the same thing that happened on feudal lands and on the commons, where women and men were much more kind of their roles were more equal until capitalism comes in and kind of. She also talks about this too in the chapter, that kind of the extremes of male and female were promoted, extremes of maleness and femaleness were kind of set up rather than a more androgynous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we've just touched on it. Maybe beat it to death, but like that reproduction at home. I mean, I'm thinking about, right. I mean, Mark is right. I mean, the capitalist has within his interest that, the tomorrow Sean is not a school shooter, right? Or, he doesn't off himself, that he comes and it works. Okay, but yet there, if anything is integral to capitalism is crises, right? That's why we need to save it. That's why you need a state. That's all the state does. Revitalizes capitalism and protects its processes. And that's not like some fucking adorable like intellectual things to say, like go read law. That's all I'm going to say. Like, go read property law. Like, that's literally what it is, and the intentions are very clear in every aspect of our society. Anyway, so there is this crisis, and that crisis is, of course, mental health, because this species being, humanity, whatever you want to call it, is in this horrible, unending process. But then you have created genders, you have imbued them with certain functionality and essences, and then majority of our labors of care, as Mark was saying, are unpaid and they're done by women. And also then these women, even though they're more and more, they're in the workforce, they're right there. I mean, I'm talking modernity, of course. They're also at home, becoming that caretaker, especially in any form. And yeah, and I don't think that the plurality of our gender mores, maybe this is too cynical, has allowed that, at least that process of caring to be equalized. I think we've raised men and then like boys and girls differently, and they develop with different kind of social tools, and I think anyways, I don't want to go too deep into that. I mean, I guess that some of this is Virginia Health stuff of like, oh, a fraternity, and not, I'm not talking about school fraternity, like just what the words mean. A fraternity functions differently than a sorority, right? Its response to its crises, its myths, they're different. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Just wanted to get that out there. Yeah, James, you want to hit us with that juicy conclusion?
Point 4. We cannot, therefore, identify capitalist accumulation with the liberation of the worker, female or male, as many Marxists, among others, have done, or see the advent of capitalism as a moment of historical progress. On the contrary, capitalism has created more brutal and insidious forms of enslavement as it has planted into the body of the proletariat deep divisions that have served to intensify and conceal exploitation. It is in great part because of these imposed divisions, especially those between women and men, that capitalist accumulation continues to devastate life in every corner of the planet.
This book is both more hopeful than Marx, even though I think Marx would 100% agree with her that history is not deterministic. It's pregnant with possibilities. And Grundrisse is a good place to see proofs of that Marx believed that. But it's also 1,000 degrees more cynical. And I think that's the beauty of dialectic.
It takes away that thing that from Marx was always like, I'm not saying capitalism was bad. It did great things. Look at this technology. Look at that skyscraper, whatever. But it's the but that he's.
We gotta go. Yeah. Right. But for her, it's like, not only I'm not going to grant you like any of those respects, like, for example, okay, working at factory is bad, but goddamn, girl, you should have seen the fields, right? Not only I'm going to like rob you of that, I'm also going to take away. So what does she says here? A more brutal and insidious form of enslavement. Right? That's very important because Marx is like, look, whatever you call capitalism, or rather the relation between the worker and the boss, it's not slavery, right? Because there is a specific form to capitalism, and it's true in a sense, right? Because it's dialectic thinking. You can have truths. And one is that you come to work as an autonomous, free individual, and you freely partake in a contract. Like Marx has that. But for her, she accepts that and also not in a different, but she does it different than Marx, right? But because Marx is, of course, being like, this freedom is a bourgeois freedom, blah, blah, blah. She does take that, but she also, and I think she uses this word like enslavement. Like she's saying that this is, at times our readers seeing, and I know, Mark, you always point this out, it's not a good, like, useful thing to say, but in my mind, she makes it worse than slavery or definitely being a peasant and then she goes on to say that and that the body of the, and this is missing, even though Marx is very much talking about the body and that what is, he has the unrest in it, that's where the kind of like work comes from, the power of work. But she's saying that the body, because in gender, like even that's corrupted, right? And that becomes, what does she say? Deep divisions that have served to intensify and conceal exploitation, which means that, look, you keep this bullshit up of this gender norms, or you keep entertaining this ideology. This ideology is a part of that. And we've come full circle to what Marx was saying, Mark was saying about that. We need to keep in mind that you were saying that these lower units are in full conversation with each other.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think, Mark, I know you're gonna respond, but I just want to say, like, I don't think worse, but I think by brutal, you touched on both these, but like brutal and insidious, like just the fact that it is more brutal, it's more kind of not necessarily like forceful, but like that it's going into the body and this biopower, like absolute control over. And for women, it does seem more brutal because it's like very into their business, and insidious, like people don't realize it. And a lot of even rebellious kind of activities and actions are just feeding back into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's I think in like a sort of anarchist theory framework, it makes sense to call this worse, quote unquote. and to say that like it is so much harder to resist.
Mhm.
That like it's the cool boss problem. Like I've had some bosses that I think are like wonderful people, and they do like way above what is strictly demanded of them as bosses, like give more vacation time or make sure everyone has insurance before it's legally required, or throw a company party twice a year where everyone goes and gets drunk or whatever, like those things are at best giving back a little bit of stolen wealth, and capitalism obscures that, violently obscures that, such that you're supposed to be thankful for it, instead of there's a nakedness in the aggression of manorialism, and there's a nakedness in the aggression of most systems of control that is simply not present and in capitalism, and it allows capitalism to capture far more effectively, such that it becomes more brutal, it becomes more insidious, it becomes more internalized, much more intense. And so, I think there is a lot to be said from the historical account that says like, well, there's a distinct difference in the outcomes of the Slavic peoples who came to the United States as immigrants and the West Africans who were brought here as property and formally disallowed from owning anything, and then had the legal recriminations that allowed their shit to be burned down over and over again. Like that kind of a structure there is something worse about literal chattel slavery, as far as like how well a population can recover from it. And so I think it gets into really muddy waters when we're looking at it like better or worse. But I don't think I think like that part of what you were saying at the beginning, Sean, I thought was really great, of talking about Marx framing this as a dialectic of capitalism representing some kind of progress, but it's got to go, right? Both are true simultaneously. And I think Federici's having a different dialectic of it's worse and not at the same time. They're both true. They're just worse in different ways. And only when I think you're right that Sean, that she does not want to grant any territory at all that's concessional, and say like, no, you don't get to find comfort anywhere. You have to like hate this. And then we can move on with it.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more contentious, and then
Well,
sorry, go ahead, James.
So yeah, you just made me think of kind of, and this is kind of a bad comparison or bad kind of way of describing it, but
Bad consciousness.
bad faith.
It's a bad faith.
But enslavement in terms of varying kind of degrees of that reproduction in the Marxist term of how much and including like how much dignity, how much kind of the mental health is included. Like you're working for Google, your reproduction, you have a nice house, you go
Right.
to sit in a hammock at work, versus
Right.
if you're a slave, your reproduction is don't die or we'll kill you first. I don't know what they do.
Right.
They give you a little bit of food and you're just you have to do it.
Right.
You're still doing the same process. One is just a lot more comfy and luxurious.
Right.
Yeah, I have to, I'm obligated to say Jacques, if it's, you've known,
You
I'm
say
committed.
it 3 times, he's going to show up in this so.
Yes, at 15 minutes intervals. It's been a 10-year contract. I'm gonna renew it. But no, the Jacques has the way he presents it is like, there's a father goes to the son. He's like, we're going to go see grandma. Get in the fucking car. All right, we're going to see grandma. You love it, you hate it, you got to go see grandma.
Sure.
There's, and this is, of course, the opening of the discipline and punishment of Foucault, right? The torture scene. And he said, now the second scenario is the dad's like, hey, we're going to go see grandma. You don't feel like it. You don't have to, but she'll be upset. She's old, she might die. You might not get to see her next week. But it's cool, you come home, we left you some money, order some pizza. We're gonna go see grandma. And the kid, of course, he's like, now he's imbued with this, corrupted consciousness that disciplines him to
Right.
go. And
Whether or not he goes is actually imbued with it, right? If he
right,
doesn't,
right.
it becomes a future story of the moment he learned the lesson of the horrors of like dying, thinking your grandson hated you, and he never wants to repeat that mistake, whether he goes or not.
Right. It's a secular religion that will forever define your actions and mind, even if you overcome it. It will be that. And he was kind of, making a bigger point of, liberal democracy, truth, blah, 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 blah. When you live under Stalin, you're like, anything that dude says, the opposite of it is the truth, and I want that. And that works.
Yeah, I get the point he's making, but I think I think there is a role for that kind of shame and not like not nation states, but in kind of smaller communities or potential like anarchist type communities. You want, people to like not do things, and you can't just like be like, well, I have a cop here to do it for you. So you instill that kind of wrongness in certain things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's
room for it
conditions that go into that scenario. Like grandma has to be dislocated at an old folks home that the parents put her into, and they're like passing on their own shame to the kid, like is part of the reason why the thing is so destructive. But because of the predicate conditions, capitalism wields more power in that scenario than a direct application of get in the fucking car, we're going to see grandma, right? Or you end up like James being what was your statement when Sean was saying, hi James, I'm too much of a contrarianism, or
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like being like the contrary of the contrary type of thing for yeah. Yeah, right.
Either way, like
either way works.
Being sculpted.
Yeah. Because if it's just forceful and you don't, sure. And you're right. It works better if the child doesn't go, because then he has that kind of.
Mark is right.
If he goes, he's like, okay, well, I did it, and whatever. I just won't go next time.
The only moment that grandma was important in this whole process was her removal. To create that condition, or to contribute to the creation of that condition, right?
Right.
The rest kind of becomes automatic.
Right. It becomes an
object.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in a society where you're not really honoring elders, you're just kind of doing these obligations you tell yourself you have to them.
And that's the part that makes like a much more insular society or a much smaller society like use of shame methods different, right? Is because presumably grandma's over there. Why are you so upset about the difficulty?
Why aren't you helping her carry that bag or something or whatever?
Right. It's much smaller. It's much like, why don't you give up something that feels overwhelmingly important to you, like a day of playing, playing Nintendo, to go and spend time with someone you may not have a relationship with because they live
don't care about
place, and
I guess that power discipline we have to come down to. I kind of forgot that Foucault was with us last time, but she hasn't mentioned him. But now that we're talking about it, I kind of see that as integral to this management of this the gender norms. Okay, so we are at the capitalist accumulation and the accumulation of labor in Europe. So this is both they're historical arguments, but I don't know if anybody wants to. And one of those footnotes is important. Yeah. So we have maybe I'll just read it. This is here. And a cool quote, Marx quote also. Okay, Capital. Oh my God, this is so weird. In Capital, Marx wrote. Oh my God, this
I can read it,
this.
and you just tell me when to stop. Okay. Capital Marx
Sorry, yeah.
comes on the face of the earth, dripping blood and dirt from head to toe. And indeed, when we look at the beginning of capitalist development, we have the impression of being in an immense concentration camp.
Yeah. No. Yeah, stop there. Sorry, again, my format is fucked up. Immense yeah.
So she's just continuing on being like, this is not good. This has not been a progression. It's not been an evolutionary step up.
Yeah, and the use of concentration camps, some people have a problem with that, but yeah, we've already had that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. But the three things here. In the New World, we have the subjugation of Aboriginal population to the regimes of the Mita and Katechil, I don't know, under which multitudes of people were consumed to bring silver and mercury to the surface in the mines of Huncaville. Sorry, can someone pronounce these better than me?
Huancavelica and Potosi.
Thank you. In Eastern Europe, we have a second serfdom trying to the land a population of farmers who had never previously been in serf. In Western Europe, we have the enclosures, the witch hunt, the branding, whipping, and incarceration of vagabonds and beggars in newly constructed workhouses and correction houses, models for the future prison system on the horizon. We have the rise of the slave trade, while on the seas, ships are already transporting indentured servants and convicts from Europe to America. Mm-hmm. What do you guys get out of this global? There's a global concentration camps, folks.
Yeah, well, and because what she says next is what we deduce from the scenario is that force was the main lever, the main economic power in the process of primitive accumulation. Yeah, and she goes on with that sentence, but I think that makes it force. This wasn't like you were saying, just someone happened to have an extra sheep lying around somewhere, or
in Curing Valley.
Yeah.
It also makes me think about Fanon, because like she's laying out a much more discrete interval framework for how we get from the beginnings of capitalism to a future prison system, right? Like through the slave trades and the indentured servitude and this kind of thing. And it's like she's looking at a smaller period and putting more mile markers along the way. And the thing that's important there is like the technologies, the social technologies that make each one of those changes necessary. As before, talking about the loss of life in the Americas, first through the diseases, and then second through we have the subjugation of the Aboriginal peoples, where multitudes of people were consumed to bring silver and mercury, right? Like you're working populations to death, which is why she's using the concentration camp metaphors, because this is, again, the logics of genocide, like extracting from a population till they die from the extraction. And in the process, what will become Europe isn't Europe yet, learns that force is an ineffective tool. That force destroys the thing you want to build. It's not actually like the bar of silver, but the silver mine and the miners that work it. That's actually has value. This is a very like generic golden goose kind of situation going on here. And so, yeah, I mean, just like the exhaustiveness of force creates these needs to continuously technologically innovate new ways to find a captive population. And I skipped over why I thought of Fanon with that, and Fanon's framework is that the problem with slavery is that it's very difficult. Gosh, I might actually be confusing Du Bois here, but it's difficult to. There's like a contradiction in trying to fully enslave someone, because you can't render them. You can't enslave them and destroy their faculties of being a like exactly the same kinds of reasons we want AI these days. We want like not only a workforce, but a workforce we don't have to spend all our energy managing, right? That if you can't destroy those faculties in the slave, or else you get less out than you put in.
Yeah, 100%, and that in that footnote 9 here, it says, in other words, despite the seemingly backward character of, I guess this is another aspect of the character of the work relation imposed upon them, is the peasants. Under the new regime, they were an integral part of a developing capitalist economy and international capitalist division of labor. Yeah, so you also have in this period, like everybody's global, nobody's primitive, because everybody's working in this same kind of big encompassing system, or rather systems that are merging. Where did I want to go with that? I guess trying to get my thoughts together here. So people are coming together. No, oh yeah. Also, there is this madness to it when I was reading this part, because when people are exploring these areas, going to these islands, going to South America, these Europeans, I'll leave the church out of this for a second, because I want to focus on, for example, David Graeber talks about, they go there, they bring all this silver, and it like fucking like crashes the economy, because inflation goes through, because suddenly there is like shitload of this thing. And then all this stuff has to move to these other like proto-capitalist systems, and like China and India, or also nations within this transition period. And then you have to send all the Jews from West Germany, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, so you can dispossess them and then use that to fund these expeditions. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that yes, it feeds certain parts, elements of proto-capitalism that already exist in society, and they're developing kind of like cancer. But there's also a destruction here, not just where the mine is, where the oppression happened, but at home, because it has to destroy itself, right? You need those like kind of heavy inflations and crashes and miseries that the system is imposing on parts of itself, like as like a defense mechanism, almost, of clearing itself of this past to create this future. Yeah, anyways, that's kind of what I get out of this. It's a kind of a big cosmic picture she's drawn for us.
Very, yeah. With this notion, I think she's gesturing towards profundity quite a lot here to say, like, most of the things we consider to be bugs of capitalism are its biggest features for its own stability, right?
100%.
That when you like take a Jewish population and move them to the Siberian frontier, that they displace, it's sort of like macro gentrification thing going on where they're like displacing the people who live there and building up the frontier there, and then in another wave they'll be dispossessed again, right? They're like the eternal vanguard of Russia's eastward expansion was its, dispossession of the Jews.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like the Zionist ideologies that develop in that very spot. I guess we're going too forward, and like what that leads to. Like, it's sometimes it becomes very hard to like not fall, not, when you're like hiding in the bathroom, like being like blind watchmaker. Like there's like, it seems.
Yeah, I thought that too, and it's really difficult in that context to even to talk about evolution as in a scientific way, to not describe it in a kind of like this thing evolved into this, when the real process is like, well, there was these random mutations and some were more successful than others. But I think it's difficult in this and talking about capitalism too.
Yeah.
But I think it's different than that kind of determinism of the transition she was talking about, because like Mark was saying, there's just like logics to capitalism that work once it's in place. It kind of has this syncretic or like absorbing kind of blob like thing that just kind of turns everything into a part of itself.
Right? Yeah, but again,
into a growing pain.
Those conditions have to be met.
It's going to evolve into communism just alone by itself. If anything, it looks like it wouldn't, based on like that description.
Yeah, because she, like, we'll get to it, but yeah, there are a couple of times that very, like, when these systems are coming together to make, mega capitalists at this point, like there are a lot of times where that fails. Like some part of it just doesn't function. It falls down, and then there's a delay, and she really talks about those. This part I wanted to read. This is kind of to one paragraph down from where we were reading that introductory. And in the middle, she says, in other words, primitive accumulation consisted in an immense accumulation of labor power. Labor power, we're thinking about humans, of course. Dead labor in the form of stolen goods, and living labor in the form of human beings made available for exploitation, realized on a scale never before matched in the course of history. Significantly, the tendency of the capitalist class during the first 3 centuries of its existence was to impose slavery and other forms of coarse labor as the dominant work relation. A tendency limited only by the workers' resistance and the danger of exhaustion of the workforce. I guess that I know I'm kind of stopping halfway in the middle, but I thought the dead labor here is it's labor power, but for folks that are not, I don't know, just explain it. Like, for Marx, there's dead labor, like in machinery kind of has a soul, because there is a singular.
Made that. I think the dead labor here, to jump in, is like the closed farms, like that soil. It wasn't just a field; it had been cultivated by people for generations, and they just stole that dead labor.
Right.
And I think she again, it's like 3 degree. It's a little more intense than Marx, because she's. Marx talks about these things, right? But he must talk about Britain. What she's talking about, like in the earlier, like when you take these natives and you like shove them into these mines, and they're dying by the thousands of God knows what, like there's really death that is seeping into that labor power. Yeah.
Yeah, because you
Anyways,
look,
yeah.
going back to that kind of the steps at the paragraph at the start of this section, she's kind of, just like describing that grand scale, like you have this huge genocide of a large number of population, clearing off all this land for these new workers you can tie to the land, and also impose this kind of regiment of work in their mind and forcing them to work and doing all that's like I was going to say too, like Foucault is in the background here because
Yeah.
every time you see vagabonds or criminals, I kind of think of that. And it
Mhm.
makes me think of too, I was just teaching my class about California and the missions, and this whole process happened on a smaller scale where the church comes in, people die, they put them in the missions, forced labor, and it didn't end up very well
Yeah, and really any
for them.
small town museum you walk to in California, some communities more than others, you'll see it. You see this was the thing. These fucking guys came after war. Someone gave them land. This was a church, and suddenly these are natives, and the next picture is the natives dressed all in white, standing in rows, to welcome the newcomers. In the most, it's the fucking most brutal thing you can do, right? Like it's like, no, I'm not gonna destroy you. I'm gonna like, yeah. Anyways, okay.
But that's that living labor. And I think the important part too is that made available for exploitation, and that's a whole kind of process.
Yeah.
That she's talked about already, talks about more in this kind of mentally forcing them to be like sell themselves on the market, the labor market.
Yeah, it's like the days you don't go to work and you feel
Which we think
bad.
is normal. Yeah, we think it's so normal that we don't do that. We're like,
Right.
something wrong.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, it's this like couple of days ago you had like Kim Kardashian, being like, what women need to do is to fucking work, get off their asses, because what women are not doing is working. Nobody wants to work anymore. And like and of course I don't, you and I, we don't have to like have our like reaction moments over this, but what kind of what kind of population doesn't go immediately like behead that woman and like just like dispossess her whole family of their shit? Seriously.
That thinks that fame of that type, it makes one credible to make commentary on.
Yeah, but I bet a lot of women that follow those women are like, yeah, you're right. You know what? I'm not doing this wrong. But I guess my point is that like during the French Revolution, that poor lady never said let him have cake. Almost everything you read about her, if you study the French Revolution, is bullshit. It's like they would, because they were producing like pornography of her, like fucking the clergy. Like the woman didn't have a trial. But I guess my point is that who's the aggressive here? Like that lady didn't even do anything, and they cut her head off for having access to beautiful clothes. Kim Kardashian, like during the pandemic, she's telling women that they're not working. I mean, that is.
Well, who was the quote by the Americans? Was it John Updike? Americans are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, billionaires now.
Oh yeah, yeah, that I'm almost there, so I'm not gonna be antagonistic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I don't want anyone coming after me when I'm up there telling everyone.
Because I'm gonna be there. Yeah.
I mean, I think with Kim Kardashian, for example, like I think she's got some wisdom talking about like people don't want to see the real you, they want to see the face-tuned version of you. Like that sort of response to criticisms of her being highly photoshopped, and like, yeah, she's got a lot of expertise there. She doesn't have a lot of expertise about what it means to be like poor and working class or even middle class, at least not to my knowledge. And if there is expertise there, it's long dormant. So
Yeah, and definitely poor people and rich people have different like economic ideas. Like for her, work is put all this money you already have to work and make more money for you. Poor
Yeah.
people, we think we work, spend your money by the with hopefully not within that 2 weeks, but probably take up that whole 2 weeks, get
Yeah.
more money. You're always so if I were to become a millionaire, most people, a lot of people who win the lottery end up spending all that money because they don't know how to have money like someone like Kim Kardashian does.
it's also, the
Yeah.
money itself
Yeah.
doesn't go to work, right? Like a financial planner or someone invests the money, right?
Yeah.
Like a worker makes more money with the money, no matter how you cut it, even if it's like a labor aristocrat, there's still like a worker intervening to like exploit themselves or be exploited for the
For
betterment
value to be made. Yeah. Yeah.
and extracted.
You're right. Yeah. And you yeah, no. I mean, you guys said it. I mean, it's the idea of yeah, no, yeah.
There was another example I wanted to add on the dead labor.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I like thinking about technology beyond artifice, and I like thinking about like labors beyond like the more immediate examples. So I think about like the Great Plains being plains. That's like a massive dead labor of like, however many thousands of years of burning down the Great Plains so that it was a plains.
Mhm.
The dead labor of the kidnapped indigenous Americans who were forced or paid, whichever way, to lead people on scouting missions across the Americas to like map the place so that it could be better exploited by a burgeoning managerial class. But
Mhm.
like that knowledge was labor that was built over generations, instilled into a person, and then stolen. So
Yeah, and then killed. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's probably like so many examples that somebody might not know about because the people died, the history was lost.
Oh, of course.
The Americas and even Africa, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah.
or ones that we're finding out sort of by sort of a statistical form of historiography, like noticing in the Pacific Northwest the ways in which the density of food forest in this area is too dense for naturally occurring phenomenon, like
Right.
very suggestive of a highly manicured way of interacting with the land, and like to make the land habitable for
Right.
people and comfortable. And not only is that stolen dead labor to be able to exploit these rivers for salmon fishing or whatever,
Mhm.
but then like another form of stolen labor of not even like having to, it's the negative labor of not having to like even feel sorry for like the very tiny effort of feeling bad about the fact that like we're living on this land or something like that,
Yeah.
which is like a pretty token gesture, right? Like it's been erased to the point of almost total erasure.
Well, yeah. Well, 100%. 100%. I mean, I don't know. I like these examples. I mean, because it needs to be known. And then these things, what you're saying is not known. It was like for Aleutians, like how they harvest seals. Like these guys would go on these beaches, and these are big communities, and how they managed to manage that animal was that to know, because when you go in on these beaches, or you going on the ice, and for whales and stuff, you have to be able to tell by myriad of factors without much tools, what is what gender, what is what old, and what is in what health, right? Because you need and of course they were practicing these things, and it's like hard to explain how they develop these anyways, but the white people will come, they're like, oh wow, look at this animal, look how these guys are doing it, now let's get these guys to do this work, except they're sending them, they're like, oh, these beaches are full of these things, let's just like fucking truck, get all of them and
There's some
go. And it
dynamite.
takes a couple of yeah, and then it takes like a couple of years for them to go like extinct, or just like too rare to have an industry on. But that's very important. Like the same thing with the buffaloes. You're talking about the plane. Like, yeah, no, these people were like had that kind of relationship to the nature as we do, except it was technologically very advanced and workable, but also you're right. It's not just the slavery part of you go get the seal, or it's not just I'm going to take your natural resources, or not just like you don't have a land now. The land is for the great father. All this stuff is that I'm going to destroy some of that knowledge that you used to develop this stuff, or I'm going to steal some. That's like you're right, and James right. Like we don't know how much of these examples have just become just this blob of dead labor.
Yeah, and and I too want to tie it to like the dead labor and the knowledge of women that I think is central to this book. And I'm definitely becoming like maybe on Federici's side. Definitely, we're totally over Marx here. That like all this kind of knowledge and intellectual labor that like all these just these few examples compared to like capitalism coming in and doing the most stupid things to it and killing all the animals and like destroying the environment, leading to where we are now.
Yeah.
For what? For more wealth to be funneled to like fewer people seems to be the outcome.
Yeah, and I think that for what, will, for better this or better that, and she just dispels a lot of that. Like, yeah, you love this, you love all of this because you're here. Like you don't know.
I was going to say, because there's a dead labor that they use, but there's a dead labor that they just completely ignore and arrogantly kind of just like you those examples you were just saying, Sean, like they ignore like all this knowledge that people have developed over however many thousands of years, just come in like they know better.
There's like there's a central part of capitalism that is like a deep respect for dual power that is missing in anti-capitalist frameworks, unfortunately. Wherein like to exterminate the buffalo was also to steal the plains, was also to starve out.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
who were roundly defeating the U.S. cavalry over and over and over again.
Yep.
And to ultimately get them to comply, which is a form of, which is like maybe the second most important moral victory that the United States ever got out of the indigenous peoples of the Americas was, and I'm sure this is generally true in different ways in other countries. I just know more about the US, but first things first was that the United States showed, or like before the United States was the United States, it was signing treaties with indigenous nations that had treaties with European powers, because that's how international recognition works. If you're recognized by someone that's recognized by someone you want to be recognized by, you get recognized. That by signing treaties with the Iroquois, like the United States became the United States from it, and then by sort of defeating this metaphor of barbarism on its western frontier, it became, in the middle of the 1850s, the world leader in GDP, and this sort of like this hope for what like Manifest Destiny really could be real. And I don't mean just the US version of it, but just like broader thing that starts in the Crusades, and has its
Just like
temporal.
Western civilization as like
Absolutely.
a totally bullshit pseudo.
The teleology of it all.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and Western civilization might as well be the whole of it. I mean, you're right, Mark. Like, of course, there is the polar inhabitants of in Russia, and the communists did the same fucking thing to them. There's tribes, the two very big and very powerful tribes in Iran. I mean, just speaking for what I know, that we've been trying to for 100 years settle down because they're like political antagonists to the state. Even though they love Iran, but how we took care of them, global warming. Like, once you're in the in a place like Iran and water goes, then there's no option B other than settling down the city. But
which urbanizes and simultaneously shows the truth condition of the state all along. See,
you
we
become
knew,
a state. Yeah, a state is not a state if it doesn't have subjects, if it doesn't overcome other things. You're right. Because and also, like, for the sake of having a modern state, like a lot of countries like Iran and India and stuff, they're ashamed of their tribal people. I mean, you see China right now.
sure.
Because of the way it portrays them as primitive, and of course these are the pathologies of colonialism. Of course, I'm speaking broadly. Yes, yeah, I 100% agree. Okay. How much longer, by the way, do you guys want to go? Maybe we have 2 hours now.
Let's at least finish the section.
That'll be good. Yeah, I like doing like a good section. Yeah.
I do have a question for y'all. This is one of the parts of the book that I regularly, just every time I come across it, I don't get it. It's on page 65 in the book. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs down from the start of capitalist accumulation and the accumulation of labor.
Slavery is
that's the paragraph, right? Okay. But in Europe, the second sentence, but in Europe, slavery remained a limited phenomenon, as the material conditions for it did not exist. Although the employer's desires for it must have been quite strong if it took until the 18th century before slavery was outlawed in England. The attempt to bring back serfdom failed as well, except in the East, where population scarcity gave landlords the upper hand. And I'm so confused as to what that means. Like, why would population scarcity give landlords the upper hand when it's cited in this book as the reason why workers had the upper hand in the aftermath of the plagues?
I think that, like, how I understood it in this context, the attempt to bring back the certain, I think it's an inability to network and become consolidated or have domination, because if there is a powerful ratio between the serf and the boss, then you have kind of more units controlled that are constituted of less numbers, like, and they're separated. That's how I understood that part. Is that the question? Is that how you're thinking about it, or what gave them the upper hand, or
what gives landlords the upper hand?
Yeah,
so
I just thought,
like, it's a management technology that allows it to have a different outcome than the outcomes in the immediate aftermath of the plagues, where like the general lack of population meant if workers banded together, they could much more easily strike. And sort of like, when there's only 6 workers, we only got to get 6 people organized, sort of basic math on that. You're
Yeah, like
saying by like
six.
rigorously compartmentalizing, you can, use of a metaphor, like gerrymander people out of their autonomy or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, actually, gerrymandering is exactly the kind of the model I had in my mind when I was talking about it. But you also got to think about that if you're looking about it with the plague, you're talking the plague is like a it's a good law word for it, but like it's an act, it's a sudden event, and it doesn't just touches the population.
Hmm.
It touches, you're talking about trade stopping, markets collapsing. So and of course, the harm that it brings to those systems kind of makes the bosses, the kind of the genres or the genus of the bosses less powerful. But here you don't the population is low, but I think
Yeah. No, I
things
mean,
are in motion, like operations that are creating power.
with enough noblesse and enough access to power, especially like, if you could hire mercenaries or something like that,
Yeah.
like that makes population scarcity a liability rather than a strength. That makes sense. Hadn't
Yeah.
really thought of it that way. And I don't know what the East um Federici is talking about here, because the footnote on that one is just the name of an author. Um,
East England, or
No, I
Europe.
thought it was Europe
I thought it was Europe, but maybe it is.
Yeah.
because I thought that she was talking
Oh,
about.
yeah, it is Europe, because in the
Yeah.
West, its restoration was
Okay.
prevented by peasant resistance culminating in the German Peasant War. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the East, I'm thinking of like Nitra, Hungary.
I mean, think of Ukraine. I mean, think of the breadbasket states,
Okay, yeah, it's got to be Europe because
the
she says
agricultural.
Western
Yeah.
Europe.
No, it's
Say
not
the
England. No.
Yeah. Well, she says England right before in the sentence.
Right, right.
I mean, where are the fucking Vikings like pissing on East England? Yeah, no.
66.
That's
And I
what I'm
saw,
thinking about. I'm thinking about the farming, the peasant states, man. Come on, the fucking Balkans and Eastern Europe, right? I mean,
hey,
that's how they're looking at it.
support for the Ukraine, man, right now.
I'm not.
Just kidding. But and the sentence before that you read, I saw that as kind of, well, what you said earlier about kind of that paradox that the employers would be in, where
Right.
they're striving towards slavery because it's the cheapest form of labor of hiring someone, but you don't want to, you need them to be human enough to reproduce themselves.
And manage themselves and
Yeah.
direct themselves, and yeah, absolutely. No, I guess you're thinking about like the fairly distant future of this sentence is like the Hodomar massacre, which is like a society that's relatively fresh out of feudalism. I mean, that's the entire Russian justification for it, is like that they are maintaining the vestiges of feudalism far too late, so they're not real people effectively.
Well,
So,
I mean, I'm more of of course, the anti-Applebaum thesis. If I could characterize your thesis as Applebaum, I think the Hodar. I mean, I think we have to also be aware of in criminal law, we got a concept of negligence. It doesn't cut you off. It doesn't mean you're not guilty, right? It just generally means that you were so fucking uninterested in the health of others and the ramifications of what you're doing, that yeah, you didn't do it intentionally, but you created this situation. And I think that's how I look at it, like this,
gotcha.
and not as a like a systematic genocide or dehumanization, but rather a total mismanagement, but also a necessity driven by the disease of nationalism, because Russia needed to do that. You know, killing kulaks, you killed the boss. It's gonna take a while for people to figure shit out. I know we like to think that peasants like immediately pick up and whatever. So you needed to like move all this grain for the population and the war. And yes, sorry.
I want to take a third position, possibly
Uh-oh.
unconservative, but because it made me think of remember when Sam Harrison was trying to debate Chomsky?
Yes,
Yeah, that hilarious thing. Chomsky's point was that, look, it's negligence, but
it's
it's worse on this
fucked.
because you're not even considering them worth caring about. They're just like insects to you that you can just step over them.
No,
You're not
I'm saying it's
intentionally.
blameworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm saying it's more blameworthy than, just you're like
Oh,
a negligent
Mhm.
driver and you weren't paying attention.
Right. Yeah, I'm not familiar
yeah.
Because
with.
there's no remorse afterwards either. Like the U.S. like might apologize or something, or the Soviets might apologize, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's like problems of management, and then there's criminal negligence in every sense of that word. But yeah, but I just the Applebaum. I don't know.
I'm not familiar with Applebaum's take on it. I guess my framework on it would be that I'm less interested in intent and purpose when and I know like the UN structure on genocide, for example, is all about intent. I think it's a weakness of the UN structure of genocide. I think that um, having a very clear, I think it's very easy to see how even an outside observer could have a clear sight on how moving, like working a population to death to pay for farming equipment that was bought using the grain you exported and the farming equipment sent to other sections of Russia that are too populated, and then those people move into the newly vacated, like that's just terra nullius in by accident or something like that.
Yeah, look, there is certainly by that time there is a imperialist streak, if you would, within the party, and yes, maybe it is almost too coincidental to be fuck up, especially the things that you're saying about movement of the population. We're not even talking about the other stuff that that
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think
they're designed, but yeah,
that's the part that I think holds the most value to me
sure.
because of the value of a warm water port.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
for a warm water port that can access the Atlantic, like on a really basic economic level, that's just like it's impossible for me to imagine that people weren't willfully negligent.
Look, I mean, Catherine the Great's a chunk of her life was dedicated to exactly what you're talking about. I mean,
Right.
she saw those generals were her lovers, also like, um, and so I even yes, it's been part of the Russian imagined community, if you will, to at least for Western Russians, the cosmopolitans, to have that access. Yeah, it just further
Anyways, that
strengthens that. Yeah, sure.
yeah, that is going a bit afield of why I brought it up. To say like, no, actually, it does make sense that specifically Ukraine is being talked about because of this, like, another milestone in history. So like handing
Yeah,
it off, makes sense.
I just why is such a lush area be so uh, kind of devoid of people? Is I guess this is still because we're like we're in history by this time. Okay, yeah, I don't know, just musings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ratio is weird. So yeah, then couple of
There's definitely
I
something about a lack of infrastructure, I think, that makes that happen. Like the part of Germany that I'm from is the part that like floods. It is the part that gets
you're
like
from Bavaria, right?
no, I'm not from Franconia. Um,
Oh.
uh, and funny. Not from German Texas, thank you. Uh, uh, but the there is a sort of like neglect there where unfortunately there's like a really short-sighted response that often happens, which is like stuff like this shouldn't be happening in Germany, which means stuff like this should be happening outside of the imperial core, right? um, but you know, that place just never gets the infrastructure that like that's characteristic of one of the most industrialized and developed countries on earth. Um,
I
and
mean,
so like
US has places like this,
yeah,
the
exactly.
Appalachians,
Exactly.
other
When I describe
cultivations.
my home,
Speak to that,
I
yeah.
often lovingly describe it as Kentucky of Germany, especially with our Blatt, which is like our drawl.
Do you think like there is some kind of right? There is also like as far as I understand, an accent that sounds conservative, but is there some of it is willful, right? Like some of that's the
Yeah,
benefit of the disaster is the kind of seclusion that it grants
correct. Yeah.
in one of the most gorgeous parts of the world, right?
Well, there's also this I don't know. I mean, I think you know there's lots of Germans, so I don't want to talk for all of them. I think that often German is a concept that only makes sense when you're talking to a non-German.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like most of the people I know don't consider like a wide similarity between themselves and Bavarians, for example.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
certainly, there's like some sense of nationalism, but it it feels like a dormant uh it feels like a dormant kind of European indigeneity, or the people I know from Leon in Spain, or the Catalonian resistance in Spain, or you know, all these kinds of things where the nation state is like uh how's my roommate saying, the first people that were colonized were inside the borders.
Mhm.
Like colonizing inside the borders makes the nation state, right? Italy is formed when Florence colonizes Italy. So,
Yeah. There is a bit of the characteristic of enclosure that happens in the formation of state or like internal consolidations. Yeah.
And
mhm.
just like with other exterior colonies, they're not mapped onto kind of original tribal or group kind of formations. So the national borders cut across uh, certain groups.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that happens a lot. And
Mm.
thinking of like
Y-
maybe the Basque, aren't that they kind of like split
This
between
do you know that like the linguistic fucking conundrum and like it's a language that cannot be fucking traced from anywhere, and it's different from like everything around it.
Mm.
It's bizarre. um and I'm talking, you know, I didn't read that like on YouTube or something. Like this is from like a linguistics, like higher linguistics class, like comparative, you know, semiotics or some shit.
Mm.
Anyways, what were we saying? Yeah, no, I was thinking about yeah, but you're saying that there is no maybe this, I'll ask you this later, but now I want to like another German things that I want to know that is like
Mm.
obnoxious enough. Yeah, so in this paragraph that is below that picture of the peasant unfurling the banner of freedom, in the middle there's a sentence that says A free wage labor market did not develop in Europe until the 18th century. Even then, contractual wage work was obtained only at the price of an intense struggle by a limited set of laborers, mostly male and adult. We already touched on that. Nevertheless, the fact that slavery and serfdom could not be restored meant that the labor crises that had characterized the late Middle Ages continued in Europe into the 17th century, aggravated by the fact that the drive to maximize the exploitation of labor put in jeopardy the reproduction of the workforce. And this is the last sentence I read. It's just, I think it's very heavy. This contradiction, which still characterizes capitalist development, exploded most dramatically in the American colonies, where work, disease, and disciplinary punishments destroyed 2/3 of the Native American population in the decades that immediately in the decades immediately after the conquest. There's this we have to talk more about this labor thing here. This labor crisis, which I'm glad we were talking about. Mark brought that thing up. There is so this is the gray area, and I think this is the most, Habermasian window, the most possible time to be alive, and frankly, I think it's where we're living right now. But we gotta wait for the owl of Minerva and all that shit to realize it. But that these possibilities keep bubbling up, right? Like serfdom wants to reassert itself. Slavery, modes of slavery want to establish, and not to naturalize it or give them will, but certain dominant classes are asking for this, and also the modalities of governance and economic lives require it. You need people to work together for any form of people to exist, and through this subjugation. But this at this time, it's just not allowed, and this stretches to the 17th century. So this is going on, and I want to leave with this. I know I didn't read it, but this has come. We've touched on it. We just need to articulate it. At this time, there is this centripetal movement, and this labor crisis is integral to that movement, and this is happening from the polity into the urban, from the urban to polity back to urban. Like they just keep going in, and this chaos somehow brings the urban into the city, because they need each other more and more to regulate this movement, and they both need to come. And another amazing things that happening is like time is flattening up in this model, because if you remember earlier, she was saying that, look, the peasant in the 15th century is part of the modernity of capitalism, because they were feeding it. They were feeding the same project. They were working towards it, not inevitably, but this is the history we have. So that is the way to look at it. Yeah, that flow, man. Like capital, we always have to be talking about that motion. Like things are in motion, but we're looking at a snapshot, right? Like you don't get to see the whole thing, but you get to see a little how things move.
Yeah. You don't get to see all the water that sort of like escapes through your fingers as you try to catch it all.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, I just, yeah.
Yeah, and this part made me think about the beginning of that last paragraph, about slavery being the form of exploitation which the master always strives. I think it's more like here, or that second sentence where workers attempting to hire themselves out independently or leave their employers are punished with incarceration or even death in case of recidivism. I think the form of exploitation the master strives is to kind of have a worker, but more in the terms of like a factory town where all the reproduction has to come back to them. So you're buying food from your company with the company dollars. This kind of self-contained system.
Yeah.
Constant reinvention of that too, right? Like Google is a company town. Like working for Google is a company.
Yeah, it feels like it's coming back because you have Amazon doing that too, in like San Francisco more, or Google is more like San Francisco.
Oh man, yeah.
Recently thinking
everywhere.
about
Yeah,
the notion of
Nike in Portland.
employer provided healthcare is functionally achieving the same kinds of goal of company town. It's like how can I demobilize you? I have to like pretend like I'm giving you upward mobility, but even to go down to halftime like a partner just did is to suddenly be subject to this, not only the loss of the wage from only working half time, which is a very condescending fucking way to talk about giving away 3 days of your week.
Yeah, of your life.
Of your life.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, to be saddled with a bill that's equivalent to another day of working a week, right? Because before they were paying for your insurance, but what are they paying for it with? They're paying for it with your extracted labor. They're giving you back something they stole from you and calling it a gift. This is the fundamental framework of the company town, is I just want all of your dollars to siphon back through me as many times as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the macro level, simultaneously, we just affirmed everything she said, because yes, first it was the company town, but company town didn't catch on quite, right? But some elements of it left or stayed on, like the healthcare, right? So I think of it like a bubble, like these bubbles that emerge, right? And this one comes and it almost makes it, but it explodes, but then, it's kind of residues get caught up in the other bubble, and that comes. And then there was another one. There was campus, right? That was the language we were talking about like about 20 years ago. And it's like, oh, like this form of it. You're kind of hanging out here. You can bring your dog. We got beanie bags, bro. Well, you go home. You know what I'm saying? And now it is just like full on, like, bitch, I'm in your fucking house. I got the camera like literally pointing to like your bed behind you, like your ass is mine, your arm twitches, your phone goes off.
Yeah, and
But we
yeah,
still don't
it's
know though. This
insidious.
one might fail and then another one come up. Like there might be a moment of possibility. But I'm sorry, I know we are in capitalism, but with capitalism in motion, right? So I feel like those things are still working.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's insidious in that way, and it's still brutal because it's all dependent on this kind of global infrastructure of very exploitative work processes and drawing kind of like rare earth minerals from mines, and behind all this kind of like, oh, I work in a nice kind of office and pool table there, whatever they do, I don't know.
Yeah, right. And also like if there's a question of freedom again, like between company town of like, look, we are in the Amazon, we're building cool neighborhoods, and there's a kind of a new possibility almost in this shitty situation when you're living at work, versus this one. Like there is a degrees of different forms of freedoms and suffering also. Uh, yeah.
I think it's the internalization of totalitarianism that really makes capitalism have that impact, because maybe I'm not sure it was reasonably true when social contract theory was sort of like first written, but maybe there was something there. Now,
Yeah.
you can leave to where it's the houseless problem, the sort of problem of houselessness, of the like, when the neighbors don't want to see the person who's lived on the street for 10 years,
Yeah.
or when they just bought a brand new house,
Yeah.
they want them to leave, but to where? There isn't a where to go to.
Yeah. Look, and Mark, in the middle of Fairbanks, Alaska, in the middle of downtown Fairbanks, Alaska, as big as that can be, and just imagine it, whatever.
Mhm.
There is a giant fucking, I think it's 20. I can't tell numbers. It looks like a 20-story building to me. It's big. It's a block, right? Condemned, just sitting there. Now, homelessness in Alaska is deadly. I mean, summer is bad. It's always day. It's flies and the mosquitoes that eat you alive, and bears and moose and all this stuff. But winter, I mean, you're dead. You die. I mean, I don't know how else to say this. This building is just like sitting there. Nobody can take it away from its private owner. Nobody can just like build a house and let them. Anyways, or fuck it. A more close example, Manhattan. Like half of it is like just empty buildings accruing value, right? I
I
mean,
was going to
we
say
know these.
here in Oakland, it's not deadly weather necessarily, but there's so many just abandoned buildings and people living on the streets.
Yeah.
Even just there's like parking garages that are like, I just see them chained off, and it's like, you could have people just put tents in there and have like a little kind of
Sure.
spot. There are like, there's centers for like encampments and stuff, but there's still like a lot of area not being used. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, we're lucky in Portland when this happened that we hadn't had coronavirus numbers that were sufficient enough to cause an outbreak. But the city's first response was because everyone suddenly cared about the homeless and the houseless,
Yeah.
because they were worried they're going to get sick from them. The city's response was to take them all and put them in
Camps.
in the convention center.
Sorry, convention center.
Giant,
The dome.
giant indoor facility filled with 800 people or whatever.
Happy Field.
When
As
you
though that
visit,
isn't just
Mark, you visited me, and there's that nice hotel that was apparently abandoned, and we talked
Yeah.
about this. I think it's like kind of right downtown, almost a nice part of town, and
Hmm.
it just
It seemed like that would have been the better option.
It
I
would have
don't
been
know.
the better option,
Yeah.
but there was a certain kind of,
Giving people dignity,
my
that was
opinion-
difficult, I think. Yeah.
in my future casting sense, there was a hopefulness that there would be an outbreak, because I think they wanted the opportunity to throw their hands in the air and be like, could have
Look.
never seen this coming,
Even I can't go with this one anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the immigration also, if you saw, became everybody was
and then you could blame it on
even
some
more
kind of,
conservative if that's even possible.
then you could blame it on some kind of inherent quality about them, that they're unhygienic and are too lazy,
Yeah.
or just can't I don't know.
I mean, border camps.
And whether or not anybody's like mustache twirling, with a top hat on and making this plan doesn't actually
Doesn't
change
matter.
the fact that the logics are like that's the biopolitics. The logics are intrinsic. We just access them immediately and be like, well, we got this condemned jail. Let's turn it into a place for all the houseless in Portland and ship them off. And you're like, you really want to round up houseless people and like ship them off to a former jail site? Like,
right.
come on, but it's the they should be happy they're getting anything instead of like not being murdered, right? That's the quiet part.
And we're Foucauldian, so everything's a prison.
Right.
Really, anywhere you ship them as a prison. So hospital, school.
Unbelievable. Unfucking believable. Yeah, no, this is ringing too true. Let me read the last sentence of this paragraph. I just highlighted it. Must be important. This, I agree, is the historical context in which the history of women and reproduction in the transition from feudalism to capitalism must be placed. For the changes which the advent of capitalism introduced in the social position of women, especially at the proletarian level, whether in Europe or America, were primarily dictated by the search for a new source of labor, as well as a new form of regimentation and division of the workforce. Yeah.
And as far as like a straightforward claim that is relatively encapsulating of the whole book, I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
Situate this all in a quest for the reason that capitalism ended up so exploitative and expropriative is because that was the goal, right?
Yeah. No, I must have misunderstood her claim about this link in the previous chapter about the raping incident, but she must have not making like a linchpin assertion. It must have been an aspect of something, because we just read it, the whole, the chapter's not even done or halfway done, and you're seeing a lot of historical demonstration of the the birth of new forms of class organization and genders, and then
and
division of labor.
Mm-hmm. And this is where, and this too is where she goes beyond Marx, because in Marx's view, like we said, he doesn't talk about kind of actual like biological reproduction. So, but the thing is, she's saying capitalism it goes even deeper. That goes to like the roots of the worker and kind of infects that and subjugates that very kind of process. So it's even kind of more insidious, to use her word.
Yeah.
Than Marx thought.
Yeah.
And the rape example.
Not that if it's just taking people who happen to be here and force them into wage labor, terrible. Right. But it's like bringing those people into existence, kind of creating these genders that kind of divide them and define their lives, and then making them labor.
Yeah, that's a little more devastating. It definitely doesn't have the Frenchness of capital, like it's utopian prowess, and utopian, just like the attitude. I'm not suggesting Marx. Yeah.
That reminds me of one of the things I wanted to say on this is that I think this desire for primarily dictated by the search for new sources of labor and new forms of regimentation. That this desire feels a whole lot to me like the history of revanchism, like the ways that it plays out in the national project, the ways in which you get entire generations of people like working for the common good, but would be like to restore the pride of this particular noble or something like that. I think it's it's where I imagine this idea really comes from for capitalism.
Mhm.
That's just a conjecture, just a just so story. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but there's definitely something, even if it's false, there's something to be thought about in that connection.
Yeah, yeah,
Because like I think it makes the link between nationalism and imperialism and capitalism more concrete.
yeah, yeah. Most certainly. Yeah, yeah. It is definitely an improvement on the method.
Mhm.
Um.
Yeah, and
Yes.
about the statement on rape from the previous chapter,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that fits into here as a new form of regimentation. It's a like the rape isn't for the raped or the rapist. It's for the one who could have been raped. It's to police them.
Yeah, to put the kind of fear into the entire population of women, to keep them in line, really.
Because as Federici says, once raped, they couldn't easily regain their status and things like that. It's
And
not
even before that, they can't. They can't just roam around at night on their own. They have to have someone with them.
right.
Oh,
They
of course.
lose autonomy, freedom.
And of
Yeah, of
course,
course, it makes solidarity difficult.
makes solidarity difficult. It has all of the effects that, like I said last time, of the sort of like the genetic politics of being able to outbreed a population, to like breed a population out of existence, like just prima nocta. And then it has this sort of reward framework, like being one of the two primary ways that soldiers were paid.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
So,
They had the pictures on it too. Yeah.
but yeah, just to say that, like, I think that's why she brought it up, is to bring it up as an early example of what regimentation really means, right? It's not like uh, it's not how to yell at someone until they stand in a square with other people in rank and file. It's like how to
Right.
get that they police themselves.
Right. Because as we say, like you need these units to run seemingly autonomously, but
Right.
there is this very real. I mean, there's a system of coercion that can be real. I mean, it's not like in the past even like 100 years. The utilization of rape has been outside of any conflict. I mean, in some form. I mean, I'm thinking about like in conflict in social sense, but of course within society itself. Um, and it achieves everything she's claiming and we have claimed. And yeah, no, I can understand it that way. I mean, yeah, I guess I was reading it wrong because I think I was reading it as like, X happened, then it pushed history forward, and I was confused because I knew that could not have been what she said, but I had to like read this second chapter to understand that. But yeah, thanks for bringing this up because I mean I understood that I was wrong. I just didn't fully understand where she was going. Yeah, but that is definitely the right way. Um, in the end, I chased the million. Okay, so I don't know. Should we?
Yeah, she seems like she's just setting up what she's gonna. The next paragraph is
Yeah, because
I'm gonna do. this and this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Land privatization. How you guys feeling? Pause it. Stop it here.
Yeah, before we get into like the price revolution, which is a big thing, I think. In the
Oh
next
yeah,
couple-
perfect.
Yeah.
I would like to plug a book this time. Which
Oh
is,
yeah, guys, plug.
White Reconstruction by Dylan Rodriguez.
Reconstruction.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that?
sort of got,
Yeah.
it's got a it was definitely, what am I trying to say, reading it in between the last time I read Caliban and this time reading it is
There it is,
really-
folks.
that's the one. Is definitely like changing understandings, and Rodriguez is very verbose. Definitely a challenge, a positive challenge. It makes this very like detailed, clear case for this trend in capitalism, although that's not at all, I think, how he's framing it. Wherein a thing and its opposite have to be unified together in order to maintain like a stable form of control. So is one of his frameworks is multiculturalist white supremacy, which the earlier allusion to Kamala Harris, for example, it's like one of those.
Yeah, actually, I was also I was having like I have this professor, I really love her, and we were just like talking for 3-4 hours, and we were talking about development of France, and she's incredibly well read and very young, so she can like she's like we can talk. Like it's very good because it's like with you guys, we understand each other. Yeah, anyways, but we were talking about this enigma of modern France, right? It is very conservative, always has been, Catholic nation. Um, very fuck you relationship with a lot of his neighbors, but especially his Arab neighbors, to which they still talk like in kind of colonial vernacular. But at the same time, man, like it has a robust social system somewhat comparatively, but a population that like gas goes up $1, like the lawyer, the plumber, the record store guy, the band, they all get together and they burn like 20 fucking blocks, and they break all the windows, including their own home, just to like get the government to back up. And she was saying that, and this is a working theory. She was talking about that, this the regime of laws that France has. They have a very specific kind of a model of law that only Louisiana, United States, follows. And they have created this scenario where very much like conservatives in the United States, like you can do whatever you want, do it at home, right? In the private sphere, fuck you want. In public sphere, please come, do A, B, C, and D. But in governmental situation, when you partake in the realm of the state, you want to be a teacher, police, and they have, of course, the state extends more into the private over there than here. Uh, you have to give up your identity. Why do you have to do that? Because when you're in that situation, when you're in that proximity with the state, then the state will take notice of your identity and it will implement it against you. So the best way to confront the state is to negate your identity. You can't wear a hijab, you can't have your yarmulke on, you can wear beard in these certain jobs or whatever. Now I'm making shit up, but you understand. Of course, there is a certain reality. The Catholic Church, like we saw, is very prominent, so it will get more privileges under such a system, but nevertheless is strict, and nevertheless is very much supported, and nevertheless it applies. So how does this connects to the idea of why such a state has such a robust kind of protest, uh, um, uh, uh, functional and effective uh, countrywide protest movement, but especially urban area, of course. But it's cross-platform, right? Conservative, Nazi, communist. Um, she's saying that 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 imposition of negation on the population when you have to give that part of identity up compels, like creates this new identity of negation that is although appreciates the working of the state, becomes resentful, unison across board, vertically across. And that creates its own mode of solidarity. And everybody's sensitive to the state. So every time the state does something a little bit overboard, it flinches and it starts doing it and changes the scene. Anyway, sorry. So when you were talking about like the cohesions of the states and that like it's not dialectic because it's just two oppositions. I mean, I guess in movement it becomes dialectic, but really like that because I just heard this and it was kind of like mind blowing for me. I thought because the hour is up. I have to say, Jacques always he says that about Malcolm X, right? That the X in the name, like the fact that Malcolm didn't choose a fully, reactionary like Muslim name, but he chose an X, like a negation. He was like, that allows you to be Cartesian in the sense that you can fill yourself with 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 all the identities, like and no identities at all. And that negation is what brings all of us together.
Sure.
So and then of course there is Alain Badiou's book on St. Paul, right? And then the whole point of that book is that look, Marxism can learn from Paul, like because that's what Paul is selling a Jewish religion, Jewish apocalyptic religion to Greek educated folks, right? So yeah, he says neither Jew, neither Greek, neither man or woman, blah blah blah. Anyways, I like that idea because I've heard it from people that I like, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the part I appreciate the most in Rodriguez's work is that he really sticks the things together. He doesn't just go, and I find a lot of wisdom in Taoism, but he doesn't do the Taoism route. That's not positive or negative. That's just a difference. But to be, choose a critical opposition, he doesn't do the Agamben route, where he doesn't just say like, it's both at once, he's like, it's both at once, and this is why, and this is how they stick together, and these are the pieces that intercommunicate with each other.
Oh,
It's very detailed.
it's very systematic, huh?
Yeah. It's 4 months in, still in the first chapter. Very
Wow. It's just that complicated. It's
No, I mean, it's just something that I've read the full thing and found that it was one of those experiences of I get it, but I don't understand why I get it. So
something clicks.
Yeah, to just like go through it slowly with a group and really check knowledge on it. I'm just getting a lot more out of it this time. So
Yeah, man. I there is no substitute. I can't want to qualify this by saying to me, but I think this is true. Social reading, line to line reading, and and reading this, really reading text like a meditation.
Yeah.
And I learned all this from Nietzsche. I mean, this is what Nietzsche teaches, right? Like really go in there. So yeah. No, I would, like a systematic book like that would be definitely fun to swim around in. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways,
All
that was my
right.
plug.
Huh?
Plug a
That was
book.
my plug. So,
I'll plug a book. I finally got around to reading this one.
Oh, here we go.
Anti-Fascist Handbook by Mark
Mark Bray.
Bray. Great.
It's not super rigorous, but it's kind of more of a briefer history of anti-fascism. Since the interwar period and since then, I just started. It's really good.
Gotcha.
And I'll plug me. Come if I'm be walking around the Lake Merritt tomorrow in Oakland with my dog. Don't murder me. Just say
He'll be looking at his feet.
to the one listener that the one watcher, I guess.
You put on a new episode on your podcast, James.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I did. On I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. I think it was like 1967.
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
I tried to get him to talk about some death of God theology, but he wasn't having that.
What's the name of your podcast?
Unknown Reasons.
Where can people find them?
On Stitcher, I think Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, right? That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them, not all of them, I haven't got around to getting on all of them.
Sounds good. Cool, guys. Well, thank you. I'm gonna stop this video.